Hello students, Mr. Young here. Welcome to Chapter 13, Lesson 2. It is called Statehood for Florida and Texas. So today's lesson covers well exactly what the title suggests, Florida and Texas becoming states. So when I think of Florida, I think of retired old snowbirds basically chilling on the beach. It's kind of boring, and that's kind of fitting because the story of Florida becoming a state is, well, boring. Now when I think of Texas, they have a stereotype as a rowdy bunch, and the origin of their statehood is in fact rowdy. They're a proud bunch, those Texans, and will never miss an opportunity to tell you about how they were once their own country. Nothing but love for you, Texas. Alright, into the content. We'll start with Florida. Florida became a U.S. territory in 1821. Remember that we basically strong-armed Florida from Spain, and then we had the Adams-Onis Treaty, and they're like, all right, here's Florida, and here's the rest of New Spain. Now leave us alone. It had a territorial government, being a U.S. territory, and even a non-voting member of the House of Representatives. Its capital was Tallahassee, which at the time was placed smack dab in the middle of the two major cities within the state, St. Augustine and Pensacola. Not counting the Native Americans that lived there, the population in 1824 was a mere 8,000 residents, including slaves. Plantation owners from the South that had worn out their soil, basically from planting the same thing for too long, took the opportunity of this new southern state to set up new plantations in Florida, especially the Florida Panhandle, which picture has disappeared from my lesson. I want you to see it. Panhandle. There we go. The red part here is the Panhandle, so it's like that northern part of Florida. Alright, other than the plantations, there were small farms and cattle ranches dotted throughout the territory. As it was in the rest of the South, plantation owners basically dominated local politics. There's a plantation in Florida. So in 1837, the census for Florida reported there were 48,000 people, half of which were actually slaves, but that counted. But this was enough to apply for statehood. Florida drew up its own constitution, which allowed for slavery. This would cause problems. As we've seen before, no one in Congress wanted to upset the balance of free and slave states. Florida was forced to wait for statehood for 6 years before Iowa began applying for statehood as a free state. Florida, with this new balance, was able to become a state on March 3rd, 1845. Now into Texas. In 1821, Mexico, gotta capitalize that, won its independence from Spain. Their territory included what is now Texas. Only about 3,000 Mexicans lived in Texas, and they were called Tejanos. So Mexicans living in Texas, Tejanos. In order to increase the population, Mexico began to let American settlers in. Kind of a mistake. The first group of 300 American families was led by Stephen Austin. Now, these American settlers had to meet certain conditions to move into Mexico. Mexican Texas. No slaves were allowed, and they all were supposed to convert to Roman Catholicism, which was big in Spain and Mexico. As you may imagine, the Americans did not really follow those conditions. They brought slaves. They didn't convert to Roman Catholics. They didn't do any of that. In fact, more Americans kept moving in, not following those conditions. Suddenly, you look at Texas, which is still part of Mexico, and there are way more Americans than there were Tejanos. And they weren't following any of the rules. In 1830, Mexico made a decree, or an official order, basically closing its borders to immigration. Oh, sweet irony! American Texan leaders, Stephen Austin and Sam Houston, tried to work it out with Mexico, but to no avail. They began planning for their independence. Basically, they'd come to a head. No compromise. Time to fight. In 1835, things got rowdy. Mexican general Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna marched an army into Texas to dole out some punishment. That same year, rebel Texans captured the city of San Antonio. Here's General Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna. So Santa Anna was furious and marched on San Antonio. There he found a small force, about 180 rebels barricaded in an old mission called the Alamo. It's a few hundred in the Alamo versus the Mexican army of a few thousand. The rebels held out for 13 days, but were eventually crushed by Santa Anna. Some American legends died that day, such as Davy Crockett and Jim Bowie. There are a number of movies about the Alamo, and they're all pretty good. Here's the old one with John Wayne. He plays Davy Crockett. And here's the new one. What day did it come out? It's within the last decade. And it stars Dennis Quaid as Sam Houston, and Billy Bob Thornton is Davy Crockett. It's a pretty good action movie. Now, although they all died at the Alamo, all the Texans, they bought time for the rest of Texas to mobilize. Texas actually declared itself independent from Mexico a few days before everyone died at the Alamo, and they basically appointed a commander-in-chief of all Texan forces, Sam Houston. And Sam Houston gathered an army. Now, Sam Houston was a pretty cunning commander, and he waited for the perfect opportunity to attack Santa Anna and his army, which he did at San Jacinto. Screaming "Remember the Alamo," Texan forces captured Santa Anna and essentially forced him to sign a treaty recognizing the independence of Texas. Now, in 1836, the now president of Texas, Sam Houston, asked the U.S. to annex or take control of Texas, basically let them in as a state. Andrew Jackson refused, as did his successor Martin Van Buren, as Texas would be entered as a slave state, and they didn't want to upset that balance we're always talking about. Texas was finally able to become a state in 1845 under President Polk. For a number of reasons, they were all in the Manifest Destiny at the time. And the Oregon Territory, remember from the previous lesson, became a U.S. territory, so that was going to be a free state soon. And then you had Texas could be a slave state now. So the balance was basically maintained thanks to Oregon. So that's our lesson for today. On your next page, you'll have a quiz. It'll be your simple 5-question, 10-point quiz. And in lesson 3, we get into war with Mexico. Lesson 4, California and Utah. Yeah, Mexico's not very happy about that whole Texas situation. All right. That's it. Good luck on the quiz. Let me know if you have any questions. And otherwise, have a glorious day.